Well, welcome to today's video where we're going to be considering the heart. And the heart's a hollow muscular organ located in the thoracic cavity. And we need to learn the basic anatomical terminology and the basic anatomical structures in the heart before we go further. So this is kind of an introductory session to cover that basic anatomy. Now, of course, in anatomy, remember you're always looking at someone else's. So it's as if you're looking at my heart. So this is my left hand here. So let's write left on that side of the board and right on this side of the board so we don't get mixed up. Now I'll start drawing the heart picture. You can freeze frame anytime you want and draw your own. So here we see the main bottom chambers in the heart. And these bottom chambers are called the ventricles. So we have a left ventricle on this side and a right ventricle on the other side. And the left ventricle particularly has a thick muscular wall. So here we see the thick muscular wall of the left ventricle. And of course the right ventricle also has a muscular wall, but it's much thinner. Now, why is it that the left ventricle has a thick muscular wall and the right ventricle has a thin muscular wall? Well, as we'll see, it's the left ventricle that's pumping blood all around the body into the systemic circulation. So the blood that's pumped from the left ventricle goes to your ears, down to your toes, up to your brain, absolutely everywhere around the body, all of the systemic circulation. So it needs to generate a fairly high pumping pressure with a large muscular mass on the left side. Whereas, as we'll see, the right ventricle is only pumping blood to the lungs. And if the heart is here, then the lungs are only here. So there's not as far to pump the blood, so the pressure doesn't have to be as high, so the amount of muscular mass required is less. Now, the key thing about the heart is it's in these four chambers. Now, first of all, we need to draw some arteries which are leaving the heart. Now, this valve here guards the aorta, which is the large vessel which leaves the left ventricle. And the valve there points up the way. And then between the ventricle at the bottom and the chamber on top, there's another valve, and that one points down the way, like that. So here we see the left ventricle with one valve there and one valve there. Now the top chambers of the heart have a much thinner muscular wall. So the muscle becomes thinner at that point. And you can probably see here that we're starting to draw an additional chamber, one of the top chambers, the atria. And draining into the atria, there are four large veins in humans. I think in this diagram today I'll just draw two. So here we see two large veins draining blood into the top chamber, the left atrium. But remember, there are actually four in humans. So now we see we have the left ventricle, and here we can clearly see now there's an additional chamber, the left atrium. So left ventricle, left atrium. Valve pointing down the way, valve pointing up the way. And this valve between the atria and the ventricles below is called an atrioventricular valve. It's between the atria and the ventricles, so it's atrioventricular valve or atrioventricular valve. And this particular valve has two cusps. It opens like this, the left atrioventricular valve. Just got two cusps. So sometimes it's called the bicuspid valve because it has two cusps. But its proper name is the mitral valve. So the left atrioventricular valve is the mitral valve, and it has two cusps. The valve between the left ventricle and the aorta, that is the aortic valve. And sometimes these are referred to as the semilunar valves because they look a bit like half a moon. So the aortic arterial valve or the aortic semilunar valve, that's that one pointing up the way. So as we've said, this vessel is the aorta, the large vessel leaving the left ventricle, taking blood all round the systemic circulation. And these veins here, remember we said there was 4 veins taking blood into the left atrium. They're the pulmonary veins. And of course, pulmonary means to do with the lungs. And the terminology is very simple. An artery is any vessel carrying blood away from the heart, while a vein is any vessel carrying blood towards the heart. So because these are veins, we know they're carrying blood towards the heart. Because they're pulmonary veins, we can know that these are the veins that are carrying blood towards the heart from the lungs. They're the pulmonary veins. Now we move on to the right side of the heart, and in the same way here, there's a valve pointing up the way like this. And this connects to a large arterial vessel, which quickly divides into two. One branch of this vessel going to each lung, because this large vessel leaving the right atrium is the pulmonary artery. We know that pulmonary means to do with the lungs. We know that an artery is any vessel carrying blood away from the heart. Therefore, the pulmonary artery is the artery carrying blood from the heart to the lungs. And we also notice this valve is pointing up the way, and this is the pulmonary valve. That is the pulmonary arterial valve, also sometimes called the pulmonary arterial semilunar valve. So both of these valves are sometimes described as semilunar valves. Now here we have a valve pointing down the way, like this. And the valve, the left atrioventricular valve, had 2 cusps. This one has 3 cusps, so I can't do this because I've only got 2 hands, but there'd be one there, and another one from underneath. 3 cusps. So it's called the tricuspid valve. So the right atrioventricular valve is called the tricuspid valve. But just out of interest in passing, we can notice that the aortic semilunar valve and the pulmonary semilunar valve also have 3 cusps. But it's this one that we call the tricuspid valve. Now, what we need to put on now is the final chamber of the heart, which is the right atrium. So here we have the right atrium, and there are 2 large vessels flowing into the right atrium. The vessel coming from above, draining the top part of the body, is superior. The vessel draining the bottom part of the body, here, is inferior. And both of these are referred to as the vena cava. So the vena cava is the largest vein in the body. The superior vena cava is draining the top half of the body, and the inferior vena cava is draining the bottom half of the body. Both draining blood into the right atrium. So what we can actually do now is start to describe the flow of blood through the heart. Now, the blood coming back from the lungs is going to come back in the pulmonary veins, and this blood is oxygenated. And if you do an oxygen saturation test on yourself, you'll probably find your oxygen saturations are about 98 or 99%, anywhere between 96 and 100%. And if you're young and fit, if you put an oxygen saturation probe on your finger, you find it's 98%, take a few deep breaths and it will go up to 100%, meaning your lungs are completely saturating the blood passing through them with oxygen. And this highly oxygenated blood containing the oxyhemoglobin is going to return from the lungs in the 4 pulmonary veins into the left atrium. From here, the blood will go through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, that blood will be ejected through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, from there into smaller arteries, perfusing all of the systemic arterial circulation. And then as the blood goes around the tissues of the body, it's going to give up some of its oxygen, not all of it, but some of it. So when it arrives back from the systemic venous circulation, from the top half of the body, it's going to arrive back via the superior vena cava. And from the bottom half of the body, it's going to arrive back via the inferior vena cava. And this partly deoxygenated blood, which traditionally in biology we draw as blue, even though it's not blue, it's still dark red, drains back into the right atrium. From there, the blood will go through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, that blood will be ejected through the pulmonary arterial semilunar valve, and it will go to each lung. So the blood flow through the heart is regulated by the 4 valves, and it's going through from the atria to the ventricles to the body, back to the right atria, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, and off to the lungs. And we'll look at how this happens in more detail shortly. But just before we do that, I want to finish off the anatomy. So let's just summarise the basic anatomy we've got so far. We've got the 4 pulmonary veins. We've got the superior and inferior vena cava. Aorta, pulmonary artery. Left atrium, right atrium. Left ventricle, right ventricle. The left atrioventricular valve is the mitral. This is the aortic valve or the aortic semilunar valve. This is the tricuspid valve, which is the right atrioventricular valve. This is the pulmonary arterial semilunar valve. So that's the essential anatomy we need to know. Now, the valves, we don't want the valves to overexpand or over-open. So connecting to the valves, there are tendons. These are called tendinous cords, or sometimes you see them referred to by their Latin name of cordae tendinae. But these days we normally call them the tendinous cords. And what they are is tissue which holds the valves, it's strands which holds the valves and stops them flapping back the way into the atria. Because the whole point of a valve, it is a structure to ensure one-way flow. So we want this blood to go from the atria to the ventricle, but not back again. That would be regurgitation, which is a pathological situation. So we want him to be able to open that way, but then not go too far back. And to stop them going too far back, we have these tendinous cords. And these tendinous cords are rooted into the wall of the heart via specialised muscles that root the tendinous cords into the wall of the heart so that the valves can't overexpand. And these muscles that connect the tendinous cords to the wall of the heart are papillary muscles. The papillary muscles. So we've looked at the chambers, we've looked at the vessels, we've looked at the valves. The other thing we need to learn when we're starting to learn about the heart are the layers of the heart. Now, round about the outside of the heart, surrounding all of the outside, there is a fibrous sac. This fibrous sac is very important because it provides physical protection to the heart, in addition to the ribs and the vertebrae and the sternum. It's made of tough, fibrous tissue. And what it also does is it stops the heart from overexpanding. So the heart can expand so much when blood returns to it, but not overexpand, which would damage the heart. And this fibrous sac facilitates that protection. And this is round about the outside. So because it's round about the outside, it's the pericardium. So peri means perimeter. It's around about the outside. Cardium is the heart. It's the pericardium. And it forms a sac in which the heart sits to protect the heart. Now, lining the inside of the heart, we have a layer of squamous vascular endothelial cells. This is a very thin layer, but it goes all round about the inside of the heart. And this is very important to make sure we have smooth blood flow, because we don't want any turbulence in the blood flow through the heart. So it's a nice smooth surface of squamous vascular endothelial cells. And this is called the endocardium. Endo means in. The endocardium is this inner layer of the heart. And of course, as you'll see, this has left out the thick muscular layer in the middle. And all this area here, thick muscular wall of the left ventricle, this bit that goes up the middle, the wall of the left atrium, the wall of the right ventricle, and the right atrium. All of this contains bands of a specialised muscle called cardiac muscle. It's a striated muscle. It's arranged in various bands that allow the heart to contract in the most optimum possible way. And this vital muscle, of course, is the myocardium. Myo means muscle. The muscle of the heart is the myocardium. So what we see is that the heart is in two sides, the left side and the right side. And this structure separating the two sides. Now, a structure in anatomy which separates is called a septum. And of course, this is the heart. So that structure in the middle there is the cardiac septum. Cardiac because it's heart, septum because it's a tissue that divides. So here we have the cardiac septum, separating the left heart from the right heart. And to put it in very simple terms, we see that the left ventricle is pumping blood to the body. So very often we call the left side of the heart the body pump. So the left side of the heart is the body pump. We see that the right ventricle is pumping blood into the pulmonary artery, going to the lungs. So the right side of the heart is the lung pump. So the left is the body pump, the right is the lung pump. So they're the basic anatomical structures of the heart that we need to learn, and that is the basic pattern of blood flow through the heart.